Hi everyone, and welcome to the Say As It Is with Pete podcast series. I'm Pete, your host, and each week I will bring you some frank and honest conversations covering various topics from learning and development, apprenticeships, funding, HR, strengths, recruitment, ESG, well-being, ED&I, employability, and much, much more. So let's get this week's episode underway and say as it is. Welcome to this week's episode of Say As It Is with Pete. And in this week's episode, we continue this month of April to look at recruitment. And this week, I'm going to be looking at assessment centres or assessment days in recruitment. Now, I know last week was a bit of a hefty episode and it covered quite a bit, so thank you to everybody that reached out to me via LinkedIn, and it was great to hear that feedback did help. And later on in this month I will be doing an episode on employability companies, as some people have asked me some questions around that, and I will be linking them in directly with People Plus and a few others. But I am going to have a very special guest on very soon to discuss about employment companies a little bit more later on. But let's crack on with this week's episode, as we say as it is with Pete, and we have that frank, honest conversation about assessment days. Now, assessment days, are they worth it? Yes or no? Well, it's a 50-50. Yes, they can be in some certain roles and in others not. If you're recruiting more kind of higher senior roles, it's not necessarily an assessment centre or assessment day you need. It's probably going to be a lengthy staged recruitment process. Now that can be from an initial call to having a face-to-face or remote Teams or Zoom video call, to then having another meeting with the senior leadership team, i.e. the CEO or the owner of the business, along with the HRD. And then final decisions will be made, and it could be that they have to do a presentation for you that could last between 10 to 20 minutes. And then from that, you can then see what decision you'll make from the candidate's input. Now, I've seen many assessment centres used predominantly when I've been doing apprenticeships, and you know, a lot of companies now, when offering apprenticeships, will also offer assessment days to get the candidates really kind of not necessarily riled up, but the candidates really engaged, to show that they are hungry and wanting that apprenticeship. And in some ways, if you know you're going to want that apprenticeship, then you'll do everything you can to get it. Now, I know from speaking to somebody in the company I work for, one of her relatives was applying for a position for Jaguar Land Rover, and it was a very robust assessment centre and job interview process, which sometimes can be a little bit unfair, I think, but it's depending on how well structured and put together it is. Now, you've got to remember, and I'm going to make a point of this, you've got to remember, it depends on how long you're going to drag these assessment centres out, how long you're going to have them. Now, I remember working for Hawk Training and working with Natalie, who I will tag into this. So Natalie, you were the most amazing person I ever worked with, and gave me the insight to assessment centres and days. And it was more about, inviting a group of apprentices in, or potential apprentices for an employer, sitting them down, explaining about the apprenticeships, how they work, what the who or what the employer is, the job it will be, the requirements, but also getting them to do their initial assessments in maths and English to check their levels. So that was from an apprenticeship side. Now, I have kind of taken that model, so thank you, Natalie, and moved it on a little bit within my organisation. And for my last few roles in my team, I have run assessment days. And that's where, and also when I've looked at apprenticeship trainers or apprentice trainers, I've also done that as a assessment. And I know I'm saying apprentices, it doesn't have to be apprentices, it can be within other roles as well. If you're looking for recruiters, administrators, HR people, put a bit of a spin on it, that you get everybody together, you bring everybody in, make it a fair and open plan, and it can be for a whole day that you do an assessment centre for. And that assessment centre can consist of the following. It will get the candidates in. So you can run either 2 half-day sessions, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, or run 2 or 3 assessment centres during the week. And then from that, you should then have, at the end of it, some really good candidates to pick from those days or half days that you're doing. And then what you would normally do is invite them to come to that assessment day and get them booked in. Give them the option to attend which one, book them in, send them a confirmation, making it very clear of the dates, the times of when it's going to start and when it's going to finish. Make sure they're aware to come smartly dressed, or what the attire is for that interview. So making sure that they're smartly dressed, well prepared. Now, I sometimes send out some pre-selected interview questions that I get them to fill out before coming. Or you might get to do them a learning styles questionnaire before they come. But I normally give them sets of pre-questions to answer before, which kind of speeds up the interview process, because I kind of want to see and know who's coming in the door before I see them. And you probably think, Pete, that's a bit cheeky, and you kind of get them to do the interview before they come. Well, actually, it gives them a time to see the questions and come up with some good answers. But it's also good for me to get an understanding of how they're answering those questions. And I think now that I've become a master strength scope practitioner, it's also great how I can now look at strengths and embed that within an assessment day or within the interview questions. I know I'm currently working with the Strength Scope team and working with lovely Mary to potentially be looking at that for my organisation and other things of how we can build strengths-based questions during an interview process. So that's kind of exciting for me, but it also means that I can probably do a little activity on strengths. I can see then from doing my strengths and being a strength scope practitioner, it gives me a bit idea more of how I'm kind of seeing people. And I might pick one of the activities from the strength scope team and run that with them in the assessment to see how they interact with each other. So you're getting them in. I've kind of sidetracked a little bit, so I apologise. So let's get back on track and pick up from where I just said. You get them all invited, you get them to attend. Those that attend, you get them in, and you'll do probably a meet and greet, get them to do a little bit of an icebreaker, their name, what they're currently doing, just a fun little icebreaker. And I know there are hundreds and hundreds of different icebreakers out there, even thousands of icebreakers, but make it short and simple. Yeah, set some ground rules and keep obviously housekeeping as well, but then also talk them through what the role is going to look like, as well as explaining the company. So it might be worth doing a little bit of a pop quiz of what they know about the company and see that prior knowledge that they've got within the group, but then also then tell them about the company. Give them a whistle-stop tour of the company, of who's who, what the company's about, what the prospects of working for the organisation is, what the potential career path and routes are. It's a great time to sell your organisation. Then go through the role and what's expected. So look at your expectations. Lie that out from the outset. Okay? Once you've done that, you can then throw in some activities. So I've got some amazing Strength Scope Teams activities I think would be great to use, and I would probably use them. But there are other activities that I do throw in. So for example, I might throw in, if I have trainers, for example, I might say to trainers or mobile recruiters or area managers, for example, people that are going to be on the road that are dealing with appointments, even tutors within apprenticeship providers. And I'm going to give an example of what I was given, when I started off back in my career, which really worked. But you might set them activity like you need to be at work for 9 o'clock. How are you going to get from your home to the office? Well, you also might throw into that little activity is say to them, there is potential tube or rail strike on this day. What's your alternate route to get to work? So you're already looking at their detail orientation, their strategic mindfulness, and their kind of results focused. But you're also looking to see how they are planning their day, so more organizational strength as well. Once you've done that, you might also do a diary activity or plan your week. So you might give them a list of activities or tasks that they need to do and give them a blank calendar that is for the week, Monday through to Friday, and it might be broken down into hours from 6 a.m. to midnight, for example, and say to them, this is your diary, this is your week, this is what's priority, how are you going to plan your week out, and then get them to give that back. But also from this, you're not only seeing how they perform in those activities that you're giving them, you're also seeing how they perform as a team and those group activities that you do and how they're interacting. And I've seen ones where it's take the paper, the scissors, the paper clips and build a bridge. But that bridge has to hold the weight of an apple, for example. And there's other ones out there as well that you can use. But some of these assessments have been used by airlines before, where they bring people in and they give them a task or an activity to do as a team and see how they work together. Who's taking the lead, who's sitting back, who's saying things, who isn't saying things. So you get to see that person interact quite well. Once you've done that assessment and you've gone through some activities with them that they can do on their own, to group activities, to providing them information about the organisation and the role and your expectations, it's then having those one-to-one interviews with them. And it's sitting with them and they can take a break and they can come in and out and you do those kind of quick fire round interviews. But the upside, as I said at the beginning, I get them to answer some interview questions before. That has always been quite beneficial because some people have said, I actually appreciated and valued the questions before because it helped me prepare a little bit more. So we'd just have a conversation around those questions and I'll ask them some more things around their answers. And I always throw in some questions like, if you were a superhero, who would you be, or what would your superpower be? And if you could be a fruit, what fruit would you be? And I get some weird and wacky responses. But some of them have been really interesting and it gets me to see the individual on a different light. And you've got to remember, during interviews, we are just as nervous interviewing as the person we are interviewing. So that candidate is going to come in with kind of pre-nerves and a little bit anxious, and we're going to be the same. Because I always say in my interviews, this is a 50-50 split here. I don't know you, you don't know me, you may be nervous, I'm also nervous, but we've got this. This is just an introduction. Find out a bit about each other, so don't worry, let the nerves settle, and it always works. So you can do those on assessment centres and they can be done half day or a full day depending on what you want to do. So for example, the example I was going to use with apprenticeship tutors, I remember having an activity done in my interview, and it wasn't really an assessment day, it was more of an interview with an assessment attached to it. And that assessment was, I was given a list of learners, I was told who was achieving, who was behind, what was going on that month, and I had to plan my month. So making sure that I brought my achievers in the first couple of weeks or in the first week, and then next month's achievers I'll put them in, and then everybody else that was gradually doing their things as well, I'd plan that month out, and then that gave the provider at the time an idea of how I would manage my caseload. Now, assessment centres or assessment days can be great fun if you have the time and the resource to do it. And normally I would probably say do it minimum of 6, maximum 12 in an assessment centre. And sometimes it's worth having another colleague in there with you to also assess as well and to sit in, because getting their feedback as well gives you another set of eyes that you probably, things you don't see or didn't see that they did. So it really, really helps. And I take some people in with me when I do these, and at the end of the sessions we have a catch up really quickly, go through people, and I find their feedback very, very, very valuable. So have a look at that as well. But as I say, depending on time and resources, you may not have the chance to do a full assessment day or afternoon or morning and have those large numbers attend. But what you might do, like I just led by example there, was give you an example of putting an assessment in with the interview. So you might say to a recruiter, for example, right, you've got you're recruiting for this position role, how are you going to recruit for it? What would you do? And get them to do a bit of a recruitment strategy to recruit for that position. And if you want some examples, then do reach out to me and you'll find my details in the bio. But I think it's key to throw in those examples sometimes, because what it does is it helps you get an understanding of that person's capabilities, but also what kind of skills they've got already, as well as knowing how they're thinking. So it's a good way to get them to demonstrate. And I've had some candidates that, I can see have struggled slightly, but had a really good attempt. And I remember one candidate I had before was so detailed from the moment they woke up on their daily plan was the time they woke up to the time they kind of had breakfast, showered, dressed, and what time they'd be leaving, to what time they would get there, even to what time they'd finish and how long it would take them to get home. Like, that's detail orientation completely. So yeah, I can see them having detail orientation as a strength that could sometimes potentially go into overdrive, but it's good to see. And it helps me think. And do sending the interview questions advance give the candidates a better advantage? Probably so, yes. Is it the right or wrong thing to do? Yes and no. I don't see any harm in them having the questions in advance if they're going to fill them out. And it may be 4 or 5 questions that you want to send them in advance. Now, if they fill them out, then you know that that person is committed to that interview and that position, and they want that job. But also, if they don't fill it out, then they're not really bothered. It's just the run of the mill for them. And they may not even turn up for the assessment, and they may not even turn up for the interview. But you may also want to advise them, though, that if you are thinking of doing either an assessment centre kind of day or afternoon or morning, or you're attaching a assessment to an interview, is just make them aware. Because the worst thing that you can do when you're recruiting for someone or recruiting for a position is tell somebody to turn up for an interview at 10 o'clock. They turn up thinking they're just coming for a straightforward interview, and that's it. You do a 30 to 45 minute interview, and then you say to them, right, now we're going to get you to do a very short assessment, which is going to take another 30, 40 minutes. The candidate hasn't factored that in, and they'll probably ask you, is there another day that this can be done? Or they'll feel really awkward and go, okay, and then do it. Then they're going to be a bit ill prepared. So it's always best to be honest right from the outset by telling the candidates what the interview process will be. You can, tell them over the phone. I'm not sure whether you would put them in whether it's a 1, 2, 3 or 4 stage interview process, but you might have that conversation if you just have that initial pre-screening call with them and say, listen, just to let you know that from this pre-screening, if you're successful, you'll be invited to the next stage, which will be a face-to-face interview. And at that face-to-face interview will take normally about 30 to 45 minutes, and there'll be a little assessment at the end of it, which will look at kind of your organizational and planning skills, and that will take another 30 minutes after that. And then once that's done, then a decision would then be made. Make it very clear to them, because I think it's key, and it's something that we forget as recruiters and as managers, even hiring managers even forget it, of explaining the whole process. And what a candidate may think is a very straightforward, go for one interview, that's it, you've got the job or not, may be slightly different. So their expectation of the interview is kind of distorted because it's not being communicated properly. And communication is key. We've got to remember that. We all say as managers that communication. Well, we need to make sure communication is key right from the beginning. So just remember, communicate how the interview process is going to go, and whether it's going to include an assessment centre or an assessment within the interview. Now remember, assessment centres, you have a minimum of 6 to 12, and take an additional employee with you so that they can have a second pair of eyes in that assessment for you. Make those assessments, whether it be half day or full day, make them fun, engaging and interactive. Don't make them boring and dull. Don't do death by PowerPoints. Really jazz it up. Even throw in some videos of people saying why they want to work for the company. Yeah, you may have a little welcome video from the CEO or the owner there. You know, if you can get those filmed in advance, perfect. You can play them in the presentation. You can play some of the role, you know, the day in the life of somebody. There's lots of things that you can do to make it really interesting. And I've got lots of ideas, and my creativity strength is going a little bit into overdrive, but I'm going to dial a couple of things up of my other strengths to counteract that overdrive right now. But I do recommend them in some cases. Now, I hope that has kind of given you a little bit of an insight into assessment days or centres, and how you can use them in a very productive and positive way. If you would like some advice and guidance on those, then please reach out to me, and I will be more than happy to support in answering those questions, and even supporting in putting a few assessment centres together for you that you can use within your organisation. Now, I'm going to wrap up this episode, but next week we will continue with our mini recruitment series for April. And remember, you can listen back to any of the Say As It Is podcasts via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or even Samsung Podcasts, as I continue to drop a podcast every Monday as we Say As It Is with Pete. So thank you for listening once again. I hope you have a great week, and keep listening. And remember, if you need any advice or guidance, just reach out to me.